Hello, everybody. This is Bruce Collins. I'm Director of Product Management with Cambium Networks, and thank you for joining the webinar today. We're going to talk about our updates to our cnReach product, which is our industrial IoT platform. The webinar I expect will take about probably 30-35 minutes, but plenty of time for questions as we go through. If you have questions that you'd like to ask, you can put them in that chat window on the webinar interface, and then we will take those as they come in, and then we can also have some time at the end for questions, of course. The session is also being recorded. You'll be able to find a copy of it, or you can share it with all your friends when you'll receive that in an email after the session. You'll also find all of our webinars up on our community forum. If you look for the webinar, search for webinars, you'll see recordings of all the recent webinars. So without further ado, I'll get started. I'm going to talk a little bit about cnReach overview for those of you that aren't familiar with the product. I'll also go through what's new. We have a number of new capabilities. There's a new software release referred to as 01-10. I'll talk about the features in that release. We'll go through the recent CN Maestro integration, which is the network management solution, and how cnReach is integrated in Maestro. There's a version of Link Planner. The latest version has some enhancements in its support for cnReach. We've released a number of new accessories for cnReach, and then I'll give you a sneak peek at the 220 megahertz radio that we'll be announcing in October. And there'll be another webinar coming up in, I believe it's October 24th. That will talk about how do I go get 220 megahertz licensed spectrum in the US and be able to use cnReach in that spectrum. So again, if you have questions, go ahead and let me know. And looks like there's none so far, so I will go ahead and get into the rest of the material. So just as a set the scope of how does IIoT work alongside Cambium Networks, when we talk about industrial Internet of Things, we're looking at applications like SCADA process control and monitoring, distribution automation in the electric utility space, video surveillance and security, lease line replacement, being able to replace the current connections that might be an analog 4-wire circuit that you're paying a monthly fee to the carrier. Can you replace that with a private network? And then certainly, as I mentioned, distribution automation and finally remote office access using Wi-Fi or some of our other access products to be able to get on to back to the home office from wherever you are in a remote area. So we really look at IIoT as wide geographic areas, lots of points of presence, and the need to move data reliably and securely across that network. So confidently and confidentially. And so to that end, we really are focused on electric utilities, oil and gas, the rail industry as related to trackside operations and automation, water, wastewater, stormwater management, and then some of the intelligent transportation, traffic light monitoring, traffic light signaling, digital signage, some of those types of features or applications in that vertical. The Cambium's IIoT portfolio consists of a number of products. So when we look at it across all of Cambium's capabilities and products, we really have focused on these particular ones in the industrial space. So starting on the left, a licensed microwave capability around PTP 820. This gives you gigabits per second, large scale capacity. We have our sub 6 gigahertz backhaul products, which is now PTP 670 and the PTP 450i, available in multiple unlicensed or license exempt spectrum, and providing hundreds of megabits per second to support remote operations. We have our access products, which are great for video surveillance and to feed things like Wi-Fi hotspots and even in some cases the cnReach products. These are also available in multiple bands, the 900 megahertz, 3 gigahertz, 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. And these are also great for feeding that large number of devices in a dense area, and so which makes it very useful for video surveillance, as an example. Wi-Fi hotspots. The most applicable CN pilot product is what we call our E500. This is an outdoor Wi-Fi hotspot that's 802.11ac, and it's a really nice solution in the industrial space to be able to provide remote access as field technicians do their work and want to reach back to the corporate headquarters or wherever their information might be. And then we'll spend the bulk of the session today on cnReach, which is a SCADA process control and monitoring application. It's available in multiple bands as well, which I'll go through in some detail. But that kind of gives you a broad sweep of the products that Cambium offers in the industrial space. Across all of that is our CN Maestro network management solution and our link planner planning and propagation planning tool. So as we drill into cnReach, really how do we align to different industrial organizations' goals? We're really looking to help with IIoT initiatives as organizations look to improve or increase the amount of predictive maintenance that they do, increase the amount of analytics they do. The need is there to collect more data from more sensors and to pull those sensors more often. So if I used to pull a device once an hour, I want to do it every 15 minutes. If I used to do it every 15 minutes, now I maybe want to do it every 2 or 3 minutes or every minute. So the amount of data is increasing, and the rate at which I pull that data is increasing, and we can help with some of those initiatives. And of course, the traditional metrics of reducing outage durations, network availability, really simplifying network operations so that we can reduce operations costs and truck rolls and manual operations. And then security risks is another key area where we see cybersecurity threats as certainly one aspect. So you want to make sure the network itself is secure, but you can use the network to help with both asset security and personnel security using video surveillance and other types of sensors to understand if you're under any kind of threat. So our cnReach platform, you can see a picture of it here. I'll give you a couple of the highlights of the platform itself. The product can be deployed as either a point-to-point, point-to-multipoint, or a relay application. In the relay application, it can be deployed as either what's a traditional store and forward application, meaning you've got one radio and it's talking sometimes east and sometimes west. And then you have also what we call our back-to-back relay, which is fitting that radio or that module with 2 radios and being able to simultaneously talk east and west, so I don't lose capacity in that node. And it really makes for a nice relay solution. We've seen a lot of interest in the rail industry for that type of application, as well as in some pipeline applications. The product has an optional general purpose I/O that you can build into the product, so that's an optional feature, but it provides digital or analog inputs and outputs directly on the radio. And in some cases, that can eliminate the need for an external RTU or PLC and allow you to do some simple things like, I just want to monitor door opening and closing. Maybe I want to monitor a couple of pressures. I want to keep track of a particular location. I'll go through the bands. The product itself is tested, 100% over temperature at the factory. So it supports, and that's done as a functional test from -40°C up to +70°C. And it, as we step it through each temperature, the radios are connected in pairs and make sure that they modulate and connect and work and function over all those temperatures. So that the infant mortality rate is very low on this product, and the reliability is really sort of tested into it before it leaves the factory. Some of the scalability features, I don't know that we'll talk about them in too much detail in here, but the ability to do access point synchronization. So if I want to scale up a network and reduce self-interference, the access points can be synchronized. The radio supports adaptive modulation, and I'll talk about some of the optimizations that have recently been added for licensed spectrum, and that's some of the new features in the 0110 release that I'll talk about in more detail. And then security, we continue to add security features to the product. It supports AES encryption and secure management interfaces like HTTPS and SNMP version 3. So the security is also sort of baked in. And then management, we'll talk about how cnReach is now available to be managed by cnMaestro, as well as planned in Link Planner. I won't go through a lot of specs in detail in this webinar, but you can find all these spec sheets on our website and also in the user guide, a lot of the detailed specs. So the latest version of the user guide that's now posted on our support.cambiumnetworks.com site has a number of tables that show you the all of the gory detail, the throughputs, the receive sensitivities, all the different capacities, and all the different permutations. So I recommend, if you're interested in digging into all that detail, there's a number of sources to that information. I'll just say that the product's available in 900 megahertz. That same radio can be configured to either be a licensed band radio in the MAS spectrum or in the ISM unlicensed spectrum through a software drop-down change in the GUI. So it's same hardware. You can switch it back and forth between licensed and unlicensed on 900 megahertz. Some of the users of cnReach, we see that they're used by in the digital oil field, electric utilities. I mentioned most of these. I'm just going to see which ones I haven't already talked about. Signage control is an interesting one, especially in areas like we see some mining applications where there's not 3G or 4G coverage to change this digital signage. You can push that information out using cnReach. Flood management, being able to monitor levels in floodplains and understanding where the water is going for stormwater management and flood management. We're seeing some applications like that in, for example, in Colombia. A number of city municipalities that own their own water utilities or electric utilities or natural gas utilities can use cnReach. And then, as I mentioned before, some of the rail and intelligent transportation systems. We also offer the product in 700 megahertz. This is a licensed spectrum that's available in the U.S. It's a relatively small set of customers today that are using 700 megahertz, but we continue to see that the licenses be sold. We have a webinar on our site that goes through the process of 700 megahertz, and we have a couple of partners that are the current owners of 700 megahertz. So if you're interested in that, we can put you in contact with them. The companies are called Access Spectrum and Select Spectrum, and they can provide you more information on how to access the 700 megahertz spectrum. The nice thing about this product in 700 megahertz is that it is 10 watts of transmit power, so it's the highest power product in this available in this spectrum, and it's also in a 250 kilohertz channel, so you can get in real usable throughput. We see over almost a megabit per second of real usable throughput in a 250 kilohertz channel. So real nice capacity, and certainly all the propagation that you need in the world with 10 watts of power at 700 megahertz. The single propagate a long ways, so you get a nice coverage area from a small number of base stations. We recently introduced 450 megahertz. This is in the FCC band, available in a couple of bands, 406 to 430 megahertz up to 2 watts, and 450 to 470 megahertz up to 8 watts. This is, again, a licensed spectrum, so you need to have a FCC grant or license to operate this product in these bands. Outside of the US, it's an ETSI product. We have type approval in a number of different countries, and we're continuing to work through that. In ETSI bands, it operates up to 2 watts. And some of the countries that we're currently working on type approval include Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, other countries in Africa, as well as the Middle East. These products are all also available in the Australia, New Zealand area. So that continues to expand the coverage that we have with the 450 megahertz, as it's more of a global band than what we see with some of the other bands. You'll see a relatively narrower channels because of the way this band is licensed. Support is for 12.5 and 25 kilohertz channels. In the ETSI band, note that we do support up to 64 QAM though, so it is giving you a little more capacity. But again, and I'll talk about the new features in 0110 that really help manage that smaller amount of capacity that you have. Here's an example of a customer of ours that I'm not sure if they're on the webinar today or not, but appreciate their support. This is in Fairborn, Ohio. Our partner there is PNR Communications. They've done a great job of integrating helping this customer migrate from unlicensed 900 megahertz to licensed 900 megahertz, giving them some additional capacity, some IP management capabilities, and overall improving the capacity of the network. So this was being able to take advantage of cnReach's ability to do both licensed and unlicensed, so it really helps with that migration. And it also allows you to mix and match some licensed and unlicensed spectrum in the same network. And here's some photos that were posted on our forum. This is a customer way up in the northwest of Canada deploying some cnReach in a very inhospitable area. So it's kind of some nice cool pictures, but it shows certainly the need to deploy these products, the need for these to be very reliable products, because going out there with a helicopter is not something you want to have to do, especially in the middle of the winter. So again, being able to deploy these in rugged areas is a key aspect. There was one question that came in on the webinars about TV white space. So we are always looking at new spectrum for this product. Today, this product does not work in what I would think of as a traditional TV white space. If you want to drop me a note, we could talk about whether any of the other bands that we have in planning would fit that, what the reference is there. But typically this is stopping at 470 megahertz, which is below the TV white space, and then 900, which is above. So currently it's not in that band, but it's certainly worth having the discussion about. What I'm showing on the slide here is a experiment or test that was done near our labs in Chicago, Rolling Meadows, which is just outside of Chicago. That's where our corporate headquarters are. Across the road from us is a forest preserve, which is great for testing foliage propagation because it's a pretty dense area of trees and combinations of trees and some rolling hills. This particular link is about a 1.6 miles or 2.6 kilometers going directly through some dense foliage. And we're using 220 megahertz spectrum here, and we're able, and what this is really showing is the ability of that 220 megahertz spectrum to really propagate nicely through foliage and over a good long range, and still achieve the full modulation of the product. So still reaching the 32 QAM modulation of the product. So a really nice example of the propagation you get. That, you know, physics is always helpful when you go down in these lower frequencies, and this is a nice highlight of that. If I wanted to contrast that to say a 5 gigahertz solution, typically we would not make it through this first clump of trees in the upper left, just where it says Golf Road there. We would typically not go through those trees with 5 gigahertz, but by going down into 220 megahertz, we're able to propagate much further. We will be announcing the 220 megahertz version of cnReach next month. So you can start to look for information about that. Think of this as just a sneak peek. There will be a number of different, this will initially be available in the US only, but we certainly are looking to expand that type approval and homologation to other countries that have access to 220 megahertz. So the platform itself covers 217 to 222 megahertz, and you can see the FCC parts 90 and parts 50 where we have validation. Should see that grant get posted here in the next week or so. So you'll see more information about that and what licenses are usable with the product. Just wrap up a little bit on the product itself. It does support, each cnReach radio has 2 Ethernet ports and 2 serial ports. So you have a lot of options for connectivity. You can fit the radio. You can see on the lower right there, you can see 2 RF connectors, silver connectors. Those are, that's a module that has been fitted with 2 radios. We also offer a single radio version of this product. And then on that green connector in the upper right is where the general purpose IO and the access point synchronization signals can be used to synchronize radios and also to read and write digital and analog signals. We offer an IO expander. The IO expander is a module that does not have a radio in it, but does allow you to add that IO functionality to an existing or new broadband connection. So if I have, for example, a PMP450i network, I could hang one of these IO expanders off of the auxiliary port or the main port for that matter, and provide serial connectivity or general purpose IO and pass that traffic over the broadband network. So it kind of gives you an opportunity or an option to add that IO to a broadband network, all with the same management capability. So I can still manage this device either through its web GUI or through cnMaestro. Here we're showing the different topologies. You can see the point-to-point in the upper left, point-to-multipoint, and then also the 2 different modes of repeaters, both a store and forward and a back-to-back repeater. So with the same hardware, you can do a lot of different permutations and topologies. Here's a schematic that's actually from the user guide. This will show you, this will give you an example of how you might interface the radio directly to a dry contact switch, for example. If you look at this diagram, on the left is what's inside the radio, and that IO module pin is that green connector I showed you. So one of the very simple ways you can use that is tie one of those pins to a dry contact switch on the cabinet door, and now you can remotely monitor whether that door has been opened or closed using your Modbus master or Modbus controller software. So it's all readable through Modbus TCP. You can also turn on motors or turn on lights, for example, if you want to remotely control that all directly on the radio. And there's no need to, for that simple application, there's no need to have an RTU or PLC. You can do that directly from the radio. So we'll talk about some of the new software features now that are in 0110. System Release 0110 is posted on our website. It's gone through an extensive testing. You can go to support.cambiumnetworks.com and look in the downloads section. You'll see a cnReach area or folder. And within that, there's two different versions. There's two pieces of software. There's the application firmware and the RF firmware. And it's important that you download and upgrade both the application and the RF firmware. So there's the application is what runs the application layer, the GUI, and some of all the networking features. And then the RF firmware actually controls the software-defined radio. So the 5.2.15.0 is the application firmware, and the RF firmware is 1.43. That's all loaded up on the support site. Link Planner is also on that same downloads area. If you download 4.6.3 or later, you'll have access to the cnReach within Link Planner. And then today cnMaestro is supported in our on-premises version. So if you go onto our download site, you'll see you can download the virtual appliance of cnMaestro and load it on a virtual machine in your own on your own server. We expect that will be loaded into the cloud-based version of cnMaestro by the end of this year. So some of the new features in 0110, we've added IP filtering, NAT and port forwarding, a seamless serial capability, and then, as I mentioned, Maestro integration and some new diagnostic tools. I'll go through some of those in more detail now. So traffic management is important in narrowband systems. So I mentioned that 220 megahertz and 450 megahertz products, for that matter, MAS products only have, say, a few dozens or sort of 20 to 80 kilobits per second of usable throughput. So you want to make sure that over-the-air capacity is well protected by the radio and by the system, because you don't want stray traffic to go across that. So there's a number of features in cnReach that help manage that. Certainly, we've had support for VLANs and being able to tag traffic and move traffic that only belongs to certain VLANs, or allow traffic that belongs to certain VLANs. The product can be deployed as either layer 2, a flat layer 2 bridged network, or you can configure layer 3 static routes. Each of those radio ports and Ethernet ports are considered network interfaces, and you can build routes between those. And that the benefit of that is to cut down on broadcast traffic that would go across those that would go across those networks. And you don't want to have extraneous broadcast traffic using up your license band traffic. So one of the new features in 0110 is IP filtering. In this case, I can add a whitelist of approved servers or approved traffic sources, and anything that's not coming from one of those approved sources will be dropped at the radio interface. So for example, I could put just my SCADA master into the whitelist, and anything else that attempts to traverse the network would get blocked, or that traffic would get dropped. With 0110, we also support NAT and port forwarding, and I'll show you a slide on this in more detail. But effectively, that's taking a cnReach device and having it serve as a network address translator at the edge of a location. So if I have a substation and I wanted to automate that, I could have a single IP address that comes into the radio, and then behind that radio can be served a number of different devices based on network address translation and port forwarding. And then finally, with cnMaestro, you can monitor how much traffic is being consumed in each area. So you can kind of tell if the traffic is picking up on a certain area. It could be that somebody is using the wrong, has incorrectly connected a laptop or connected the network incorrectly. All of a sudden I have more traffic and I'm overloading a link. You can identify that using cnMaestro. Here's a little snippet from the graphic interface for net filtering. This is, again, I can add either a particular IP address that I want to allow or a particular subnet that I want to allow. And again, it's a whitelist, so meaning if it's in this list, it will be allowed to go over the network. Anything that's not in this list would be blocked. And then for NAT and port forwarding, one of the use cases for this is if I have a set of locations that I want to do automation, I can have the exact same setup at each of those locations. So let's say I have an RTU and then maybe a snapshot or a low data rate camera. I can put each at several different locations. I can have those set up with the same IP address from location A, B, C, and D, or in this case, box 1, 2, and 3, and then I can address each cnReach radio with its unique IP address. But behind that, using NAT and port forwarding, the devices are, in some cases, protected from broadcast traffic, and then also I can have the same exact IP configuration from place to place. So it reduces complexity of IP numbering and IP address space setup. And I won't go into this in detail, but here's a little snippet. And this is covered in the user guide. It's also covered in some detail in our certification training classes. So if you attend one of our training classes that we have scheduled, you could, and you can go to our website and learn about the schedules for these training classes, but you learn more about this capability there. Seamless serial is a real nice capability for those customers that are using serial RTUs or PLCs. And the way this works is I can take a set of serial radios and define that as a radio group. And then any traffic that appears on a serial port in that group will automatically appear at the serial port on every other radio in that group. So it kind of sets up a virtual serial network or virtual serial multi-drop network that goes out over the air. And we do two things with that data. We strip away a lot of the overhead so that we're taking away some of the Ethernet headers and the IP headers to reduce the TCP/IP overhead. We're also prioritizing that traffic ahead of all IP traffic. So the serial data always goes out over the air first, and you prioritize that. So if you have PLC communications that is being done as a priority for SCADA, you can make sure that that seamless serial traffic is prioritized. And again, the way you configure that is you set up the radios within a group that you want to have a shared serial interface, and then assign each radio in that group to that group, and it's ready to go. It's pretty straightforward to set up, and it's really a powerful feature because you can then mix the serial traffic with IP traffic. Many other radios, you have to say I'm either all serial or all IP. With this, you can mix serial and IP traffic at the same time. So with 0110, we also support a device agent on each radio. This is the device agent is for cnMaestro. And the way cnMaestro works is it provides a network management capability. And you can see here in a picture, it shows a mapped view of the location of the radio. It shows the capacity that's being used, consumed. It shows a topology, so you can see it automatically detects that I'm an endpoint and I'm talking to a dual radio that has an endpoint and an access point. If you look at that device health widget in the middle. And then it'll also give you all of the statistics about the radio, including current firmware release. You can track, I don't know if I have a plot of that in this deck. You can track performance over time, so I can see what is the capacity, what's the transmit power levels or receive power levels. I can plot that over time and see how that's changing as I monitor and maintain the network. One of the things that's unique or different about cnMaestro is that it does use that device agent in each device, and that allows us to operate as either a cloud-based environment or a on-premises based environment for cnMaestro. And the way that's different is that the device agent is what's initiating the connection. So it's that radio that's behind the firewall is initiating an HTTPS connection out to a cloud-based instance of cnMaestro. That's different from a traditional SNMP approach, which would require me to puncture that firewall and have the network server or the network management server go in and pull each of the devices. In this case, it's the device agent on the device itself that's initiating the communication. So it's a much more secure approach, and it's using HTTPS as the transport. So the other thing we can do with the current version of cnMaestro and cnReach is push password changes. So with cnMaestro, you can set up a configuration task or job and say that I want to update all of the passwords for both the read-only and the administrative passwords on all the devices. And you can push that out at whatever interval you like. So if your corporate policy is I need to upgrade or update the passwords every 30 days or every 3 months, you can push that in an automated fashion. I don't have to go out and touch every radio in the network. I can configure that job on Maestro and let it do all that work. We've also recently introduced a series of Yagi and Omni antennas. The spec sheets of these are on our website. You can see we have 900 megahertz Yagis, a couple different gains on those antennas. We have a 400 megahertz Yagis, again, an 8.5 and 12 dBi. And then also on the 700 megahertz, we have just the 8.5 dBi gain antenna. And then the last one I'll show you here is the Omni antenna. This is a wideband Omni that covers everything from 400 megahertz up to 900 megahertz, so you can use it with any of the cnReach radios. The gain will vary as you swing from the lower to higher, but it's a nice small compact Omni antenna for this type of application. I wanted to just point out a couple things on cnReach, because there are a number of different options. But the main way that you go through selecting a cnReach radio is you pick the frequency of operation. So today it's 900, 700, 400, or coming soon 220. You decide whether I want a single or dual radio, and then you decide whether you want I/O or not. So for each band, there's effectively 4 radios, 1 or 2 radios with and without I/O. Then there's a number of accessories we talked about that you can select from: power supplies, antennas, rail mounts. And then the end customer will deploy with typically within a NEMA enclosure and provide their own RF cables. We do offer with those Yagi antennas and the Omni antenna an installation kit that includes a drop cable, surge suppressor, the little jumper cable from the radio over to the surge suppressor. So if you'd like, you can order those Yagi antennas with a complete installation kit, and really makes the whole thing really kind of a turnkey implementation. So it makes for a nice complete kit. It has all the weatherproofing and ground strapping and all of that's required to make a nice professional install. We also offer some warranty, and of course, cnMaestro and Link Planner are available at no charge, up to Link Planners at no charge, cnMaestro up to 2,500 devices, and so those are available now, again, from our ordering from our support website. So let's see if there's any questions on the webinar window here. That's kind of the key content. Again, what makes cnReach unique? Supporting for those dual radios, lots of different bands to choose from. We've introduced with 0110 a number of features that assist with managing traffic on licensed bands. The product has synchronization to reduce self-interference, hitless adaptive modulation, so the radios will adapt their speed to the conditions of the environment. We talked about built-in general purpose I/O. So if you want to monitor the door opening or closing, or maybe some simple voltages, battery operation, you can do that with the built-in I/O. And then cloud-based management with cnMaestro. So the ability to manage the network remotely is a key differentiator, and that capability is definitely going to continue to increase. Okay, looks like there's a question here on the window. So the question that's come in is about synchronization. So the way that works is if I have multiple access points on a tower, and you want them, because cnReach is a TDD radio, a time division duplex radio, you can synchronize that frame structure so that all the radios are transmitting at the same time and receiving at the same time. And the way you can do that is you can, if you just have a couple of APs on one tower, you can synchronize them by connecting the interface just with a direct wire on that green connector from the picture. So it's that IO connector. If you connect those two pins together and you set one access point to generate sync and the other one to receive, then all in the GUI, then they'll be synchronized. If you have multiple towers that are in different areas, say a few miles or a couple kilometers away from each other, and you still want them to be synchronized, you can use Cambium's UGPS module to synchronize multiple towers. And they'll use that GPS signal to get a 1 pulse per second precise timing signal coming from the GPS satellite, and use that as the synchronization. There's another question here about how many, in a point to multi-point network, how many endpoints can I put on an access point? And of course, that'll depend on the amount of capacity you're using, depending if they're using the unlicensed 900 megahertz or one of the licensed networks with lower capacity. In practice, we say that you should think in terms of 50 to 70 endpoints per sector. You also need to look at the application and how fast you're pulling and what kind of depth that you're pulling on each of those devices. On licensed spectrum, oftentimes the polling is done in a round-robin fashion so that you are really controlling. Let's say I have 30 devices or 40 devices on an access point. I can step through and pull one after another in series, and that prevents the overloading of the network and allows you to scale up. So there's not a real theoretical limit on how many endpoints you can put on an access point, but in practice, we suggest 50 to 70 as a rule of thumb. So just to close up the webinar here, we do offer a lot of ways to contact Cambium. You can go on our Facebook page, you can contact us on LinkedIn, Twitter, a number of different options there. And then the one I like to recommend is the community forum. So that's community.cambiumnetworks.com. You can post questions or comments on there about any of the products. These comments are read by users of our products around the world, so you get some commentary and feedback and opinions from around the world. They're also read by our product management team and engineering teams. So it's a good way to interact with Cambium and with your fellow customers of the products. So strongly recommend. That's a nice place to go. We also post a lot of knowledge-based articles and some of the more esoteric comments and details that you might not even find in the user guide, but you'll be able to get access to those on a knowledge base. So with that, I appreciate everybody joining the webinar today. Want to again solicit any feedback you have. You can go ahead and post it on the forum. You can also drop me an email. I think I put it maybe at the beginning, but if not, it's just simply bruce.collins@cambiumnetworks.com. And be happy to discuss opportunities or applications you might have for cnReach, and we can help you be successful. So again, thanks for joining, and we'll look forward to talking to you in a webinar in the future.